Welcome to Cravings Control for Fat Loss. I'm your host, Laura Cavallo, former sugar binger, overeater, and yo-yo dieter turned fat loss and cravings coach for hundreds of busy women. Here at Cravings Control for Fat Loss, I'll be sharing mindset, movement, and metabolism strategies for those who are ready to ditch the fat diet cycle and slim down without counting calories, tracking points, or giving up any of the foods they love. Get ready to embrace progress over perfection, grace over guilt, and bring curiosity and learning to the inevitable ups and downs of your life. Expect a decrease in your cravings while seeing and feeling an improvement in how you look, how you feel, and your overall quality of life. I am so excited you're here, boo. Let's get started. Welcome to another episode of Cravings Control for Fat Loss. My name is Laura Cavallo, your cravings coach, and today we're talking with Brandy Schroeder. Coach B is an online nutrition and health coach in Leduc, Canada. She coaches women on how to achieve fat loss forever, achieve food freedom, and achieve the goals they desire through sustainable approaches that will last a lifetime. Her approach is simple, no BS, and she helps them figure their shit out. Coach B is a mother of 2 girls. She enjoys lifting weights, going for long walks, and is a student for life when it comes to all things mind, body, and fitness. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Speaking of enjoying episodes, if you have been enjoying the podcast, I would love to get your honest review on what you think of the content that we're putting out there. Your honest reviews help us reach more women and other people that need our content and need this free information. Thank you again so much and enjoy this episode. Hi, Brandy. How are you?
I'm good, Laura. How are you?
I am doing great. I'm so excited to connect. It's been a while. You and I did a business mentor mind together last year and connected a little bit. So I'm excited for you to talk with our viewers or our listeners today and share a little bit about your journey. You've been in the health and fitness field for a long time. How long has it been now?
Do you know what? Here's the thing. I've been in it for so long that I don't even know, because I'm like, when did I actually start? And it's kind of funny because I feel like I was 19 years old when I first stepped into the gym. But then there's a side of me is like, was I 20, 21? Because I also met my my spouse, my husband, whatever you want to call him, back then too. And so I'm like, what year was it? But I've been here a long time. And it seems like forever. So I would say most of my adult life, because if you were to talk about starting at the age of 20, that's kind of where I started in the industry. Yeah, for sure.
And is your husband in health and fitness?
No, he is he's oil country. And
nice.
So that's what he is. So we've definitely lived our whole life. I can say I'm like, you have the housewives of whatever, Beverly Hills and all that.
Yes.
It's like the housewives of oil country, Western Canada. That's what it is out here. So
that's really cool.
He did join the gym with me though when we first met, and we for the first couple of years of our relationship, we trained together all the time for sure. And it was probably part of that journey that really had me just, I don't know, like I just knew then too, like I'm working out with my partner, but I also just like, I love so much about what this does for me. And it was kind of laying that foundation for where I am today. So,
yeah. Well, why don't you share with us a little bit about why you got into health and fitness and what your journey has been like, coming in your 20s, going through your 30s, now in your 40s. And what's that? Give us the whole story. Start from the beginning.
Okay, so to give some context, I say this about myself, and I know some people frown about the language that I would use, but I was the fat kid in the playground. So I grew up very chubby up until the age of 12. And I didn't realize how overweight I was until I lost the weight. And I remember being teased as a kid. I remember, like, I still look at the pictures and think, oh my gosh, I can't believe and I know, and again, I'm being harsh on myself that I looked that way and I was that way. My parents didn't really see it, but my brother was a hockey player, skin and bones, played very, very active. Whereas I was the kid that just sat there, ate my feelings. Because when I think back, I do know I used food as a coping mechanism, 100%, for sure. But it was when I was 12 years old, we had moved, and my dad had said basically to me, he's like, I need help outside. We ended up buying a place that had like acres and acres of land to mow. And back then it's not like I had a ride on mower. So my dad had me push mowing. And within a summer, it was almost like within a summer, I kid you not, I went from being 150 pounds, I'm just going to use numbers, to probably about 110 pounds. And I didn't know how overweight I was until I remember saying to my mom, I'm like, I don't even know what these things are. And I had stretch marks on my stomach. And I'm like, I thought only pregnant women got this because my mom had them. Mm-hmm. And it was in that moment, I'm like, I never want to be like this again. So like that kind of just started the whole thing. And then I remember being like, I would wake up early in the morning and go for runs, and I would watch this. There was a show called This Everyday Workout, and I would put on my mom's spandex and I would do this everyday workout in front of the TV. So I kind of got involved that way. And then through high school, I played sports, but I was still considered, in my opinion, because I would still be teased a little bit, like the bigger girl. I was never really thin. I mean, yes, the first little bit that I lost weight, I definitely was like, it was like night and day, but I was never thin. I was always like athletic. It wasn't until I graduated and I moved out and I joined my first gym did I realize really what I wanted from fitness. Because I'd always had a Shape magazine. I've always aspired to look a certain way because I was just obviously so unhappy and didn't really understand what I really wanted from my body other than I just didn't like it. That when I went to the gym, I remember seeing a girl in one of the areas of the gym and I'm like, wow, she's in shape. And she was a quote unquote bodybuilder. And it wasn't until I asked her, what she was doing with her life and what she was getting ready for that I learned about bodybuilding shows and stuff like that.
And how old were you when you learned about bodybuilding?
About 19-ish,
okay.
20. Yeah,
wow,
pretty
so
young.
Right at the beginning of your fitness journey.
Yeah. But then I was pursuing being a personal trainer, right? So I was doing my education and doing all those kind of things to get certified. But I was never like, I could never understand. Like, I don't look like her, but I'm in the gym. I didn't know what I was doing wrong. And I got these magazines and I got all these pictures and I'm like trying to aspire to look like these females. And I'm like, it's not happening. But I've always thought that muscle looked amazing on women. And I didn't give a shit. Like, I don't care what anybody says, even to this day. Like, I think it looks so attractive. It's like everything about it, right? The stronger you look, the better, in my opinion, except there's a certain fine line, right? But at the end of the day, I started training and I just really loved it. So I was a personal trainer. And then I did my first bodybuilding show in 1999. So I would have been 24, stepping on stage. And then I had my first daughter when I was 25-ish, 26. Wasn't planned, but it happened. And then from that standpoint, became a mom for the first 5 years, just having kids and stuff like that. I stopped personal training, had to figure my own shit out because personal training wasn't paying the bills. And through that entire time that I'm being a mom and no longer personal training, I had a messed up relationship with my body and food. I just never talked about it or told anybody. I just assumed this is how everybody was. Right. And so
messed up in what way?
I would always, because you have to remember, so I did a bodybuilding show in 1999, but I was also the fat kid in the playground. And I told myself back then, I never wanted to be overweight. But when I finished competing and after how I looked and to where I was a week after my show of gaining 20 pounds in 1 week, the disordered eating mentality and the disordered thoughts around like how I looked, it was just compounded by an already shitty body image that I had. Yeah. And so like for me, I battled that after having, like, I remember telling my mother-in-law that I was pregnant and she's like, oh, don't worry about it. You'll get your body back. And I'm like, okay. So she's thinking that too. Like as soon as you're pregnant, like everything's going to go to shit. And so like, there was just a lot of things in the industry at the time that just reinforced that you had to look a certain way and you had to be a certain human to have worth. But I battled it because I really didn't feel like I didn't have great self-confidence at all. Right. And so after having my daughter and then like not competing, but knowing how I looked, I would battle that whole like eat clean, because that's what was happening then was eat clean, have a cheat meal, eat clean, have a cheat meal, cheat day, eat clean. And I would just go back and forth, but then use exercise when I could to compensate. And it wasn't really until after I had my second daughter, so that was 5 years later, that I realized that I needed to get my shit together. And I just like, I wanted to get back in the gym and, and I was fortunate enough to work from home and my husband was really busy. And so like, I knew financially we'd be okay if I took that leap. But again, like, here's me, I'm going back to the, wanting to work out and do all these things. And I never felt like I was just valued enough or that I felt validated enough. So I just had a disordered body image and just really didn't feel confident, even though I'm the trainer, even though I know what I'm doing. Right.
And that value was coming from growing up in a fatter body, being teased, losing weight, succeeding in the gym, changing your body, getting that validation, being at shows, controlling your food, controlling exercise, being able to change your body by manipulating those elements, and then being reinforced by media and people. Oh, you'll get your body back. Or, you look so good. Or gain 20 pounds after your show, right? So all of these things were impacting you and kind of reinforcing that negative body image and those unhealthy habits.
Yeah. And then slam right in the middle of everything is like, I'm at this point where I'm training and I'm feeling good about myself. And my mom gets really sick in 2011 or 2010. And then 2011, she passes away. And my way to maybe manage my grief was to just get back into the gym and do all the things. And that's the year I decided to compete. And I didn't stop competing until 2014. So I competed straight from 2011 all the way through to 2014. And it just made everything that I was kind of working away from compounded again. And it's interesting because when I look back now, there were so many red flags, but yet I ignored them. And how I coach now, I mean, it's because of those lessons learned about myself and the things that I learned. But I mean, I ignored all my negative thoughts about myself. I ignored how I thought about food. I thought that was normal to have all these food labels and eliminate this, eliminate that, restrict this, and just do all the cardio, do all the training, because that's what I was brought up in. That was the bro science. And that's just how it was. Extreme dieting was the only way to go and to get things done. And so it just like, it wasn't until I was done and I felt like I was completely, and I use these words, it's not what was actually happening to me metabolically speaking, but I did feel broken. I was tired of this mind fuck in my head over like good versus bad. Don't do this, don't do that. Get in the gym. You overate. How did you do that? Why did you do that? You shouldn't have had that. You shouldn't have, like, it was just, those thoughts were ringing through my head and I am an expert.
Exhausting.
It's exhausting. And so like, I don't know, like that's my experience. And all through that entire time, I'm, coaching clients and I'm not letting people know how I truly feel about myself. I'm teaching them how to not do this. And yet I had my own demons. So it was hard. It was definitely hard. But I mean, now I look back and I'm like, fuck, thank God I went through all that. Like, I'm so grateful for every aspect of being the fat kid in the playground to, my first show, to having kids, to competing again, to being right where I am now, because it's been a blessing.
What are some of your biggest takeaways from all that? Give us your top 2 or 3.
I feel like this. I do think that people have to learn, like for me, I have to really pay attention to my thoughts. And what I think is interesting, even when I coach people, is like we give ourselves this narrative, these beliefs, right? And what I've learned is that we just got to get curious about those thoughts, right? If I had just asked myself, am I worthy? Like, what's true about that statement versus not? Like, if I could have found the evidence, I probably would have been in a better place. But I just assumed that no one liked me because I was once the fat kid. Like, how am I worthy? Or even when I think back to like how my mom and I didn't have the greatest relationship. But maybe if I realized that it was all like, it wasn't me, that maybe my mom was part of this issue, I would have understood that, right? But at the end of the day, I think that just getting curious about my own thoughts would have been probably taken me down a better road. But also too is like paying attention to the red flags. So like I suffered hypothalamic amenorrhea. So basically I lost my period the entire time I was competing. But I didn't care because I wanted to look great on stage. I didn't fucking care. And I'm just like, what? Like what? Now I'm just like, I'm the person who talks you off the stage. Like, I just don't want you to compete because of all these reasons. So like just paying attention to the red flags instead of ignoring them because, like I don't know the long-term effects of any of that. We speculate. I mean, I know there's enough, some evidence out there, but I mean, at the end of the day, like I should have just listened and thought to myself, damn, like losing my periods, that's a problem actually. And just recognizing that, there's value outside of just how you look. And so like, I think that that's part of it. And now I am that person who's like, I could give a shit what anybody thinks, says, or anything about who I am as an individual or coach or anything like that, other than the fact that if I can help you change your life, that's what's important to me. But you don't have to like how I look. I don't care if you make judgment calls on my muscles. I don't care if you think I'm too fat for what I do. Like, I don't care, because I know I'm worthy, and that's good. That's where I'm at. I'm at peace with that. Acceptance, maybe, of where I am with my body, and that I don't have to look a certain way in order to be successful or to be validated.
Wow, that's really powerful.
Yeah. And so with that, it's also how, as a mom, I feel is very important. I had this question asked of me this morning at my physiotherapist's appointment. And he asked me, because he knew my background in bodybuilding. And he's like, did that conversation about how you looked ever influence how they are now and how they perceived it and how they might respond to their own body image? And I'm like, nope. Because even though I was in the depths of bodybuilding, and it's selfish. It is so selfish. But I never talked about how I looked with my daughters in the sense that I'm dieting to look because I felt like unhappy. I talked about how I was in a sport, a competitive sport, because I knew for them, I didn't want this for them. So for me, and they were young, I just remember just like when Brooke would ask me, like, why don't you eat the same chicken as us? I would just say, oh, well, like, remember how mom's doing a sport? I have to be really strong and competitive. That's what I would talk about. I would never say, well, I have to be a certain level of body fat and I got to do this and do that. Never talked about that. So to this day, neither one of my daughters have body image issues that I am aware of, because we have open conversations about.
That's great.
Like, because both my daughters have been active throughout high school. They both have played high level basketball. And all I talk about is like, okay, did you eat enough today to fuel your games? Like, even now, my daughter has a tournament this weekend, and I'm worried about today and how she's fueling, because she plays tomorrow night, Thursday and Friday and Saturday. So like, I'm just making sure she's eating enough.
Yeah.
Care, actually, I don't break it down to like, you better be having an apple, or you better be, eating pasta. Like, I actually don't care, as long as she's eating consistently and she feels good. And we don't talk about how she looks. It's all about how she performs.
Yeah. And I'm sorry about your mom's passing. My dad passed away when I was young, and I feel like a lot of my unhealthy habits, eating, drinking, numbing the pain, unhealthy habits that brought me to the edge, really, really scary stuff, I was able to heal those through therapy and talk therapy. Is that something that you dove into to kind of help you with some of your mental health challenges, thought processes that you were struggling with?
No, it's one of the things that I feel like I probably could do, especially now, because I just feel like with the amount of people that I work with on a regular basis, I do feel like we can all suffer through, well, specifically in our industry, that professional burnout, but I've not. What I feel like I did, and I know looking back, it probably wasn't the best, but like with my mom, we didn't have a great relationship. So part of me believes, like, don't get me wrong, I loved her, but there's turmoil. We were not kind to each other on a regular basis. And I feel like when she passed away, I used the gym like I would with everything else. Like, the gym is like, when they say iron therapy, I truly do believe that. And I think when I look back, if I were to be really honest with myself, my choice to compete that year had already kind of been established, kind of like the latter part of 2010. And then we only had about 6 weeks with her. She died very early in January, 2011. I wanted to compete in July of that year. I knew that. And so like, part of me is just like, I'm just going to shift all my focus into that. So I didn't really grieve, and I didn't have any issues there. I was more like, I need to be there for my dad and just kind of be like, what can I do for him? But I shifted into like selfish mode. Like, this is for me. Right. And so like, I never really grieved my mom the way I think most people would. And to this day, I'm open and honest about that. Like, I guess if I had had a really close relationship, like, it would probably impact me differently. Like, it was different with my brother and my nieces, who were pretty much raised by my mom. But for me, it was just so different, right? Yeah. Now, flip the switch, and if or the script and it were in my dad, that would be a different story, because my dad and I have a different relationship, right? So I think that it's like, I think for everyone, it's a different scenario. But for me, I didn't have to reach out At least I thought. But now I do think it would benefit me to have a really good conversation with someone about a lot of these things, because where did some of that start? Because I think that trauma can show up, and I don't like to use the word trauma loosely. I do think that everyone experiences different traumatic events in their life, and losing a parent is part of that. But also too, like being that fat kid in the playground and being bullied and mistreated that way, and no one really being there when you're there in that moment yourself, that no one will understand that. Like, even when I talk about it now, like people are like, oh, really? You were bullied? And I don't even think my brother thinks I ever was. But I'm like, I was though. People called me the chubby chicken, the chubby one. I was the last one picked on the fucking teams. I remember one of my principals at my junior high school. I'd moved from one town to another, and I was still quite overweight in grade 7. And I remember him making me run laps by myself because I couldn't keep up. And he made the entire class wait until I was done. How humiliating is that? But that's what I was brought into, right? And then that following year, I lost all the weight. And that principal or teacher never really talked to me the same way. Like, you treat me differently because I look different? It's bullshit. I'm the same human, right? So I think that now, sure, I could probably have a few conversations about it, but I feel like, you know what's therapeutic is having conversations with you or like-minded individuals in our space and understanding, even as coaches, we're all here. I think the best coaches have gone through some of the hardest things in our lives, and it's what makes us amazing. So if I didn't have my clients, yeah, I'd probably need full-time therapy for sure.
Yeah, and you just spoke so clearly about being reflective of your thoughts and being aware of your thoughts and being curious about your thoughts. And not a lot of people are able to slow down and be reflective in that way unless they have someone else guiding them. So, I mean, that's kudos to you for being able to recognize some of those unhealthy patterns and kind of take yourself out of it, because not a lot of people can. But probably a highlight of us being coaches and being so in tune with our body and our minds, especially to a certain point. So from 2011 to 2014, you were competing in bodybuilding and then decided to get out of it. What was your journey after that? And what brought you to this place now of coaching women with their own health journeys, and kind of what's your approach now?
Okay. So in 2014, I don't know if anybody's gone through this, and I guess I could kind of talk a little bit about it, but you experienced the post-comp blues. Nobody talks about that stuff. And it was really hard because it's kind of like you prep for a wedding, and I've been fortunate enough to have 2 babies. So you get all excited for this birth or whatever, right? And then it's like nothing happens. But also, to understanding this now, there was a huge, huge shift in hormonal everything, right, going on with me after dieting and stuff like that. Didn't know that. I had no idea what to expect. But that all being said, I was kind of in like that lost place. I was tired of being in the gym, tired of looking at everybody around me. You know, it's all about how we look. And it's just like bodybuilding. Like I was actually tainted. I was just like, I didn't want it anymore. So I kind of shifted a little bit for a tiny, tiny bit into a little bit of powerlifting. But I'm like, I can't do this on my own without a coach. Like, I didn't want to hurt myself. I didn't want to be, in that place. Right. So it's a funny story. One of my clients who did compete, and I'd coached her through it, decided to join a CrossFit box. Like, she was just loving life. And I'm like, oh my God, like CrossFit. Like, I was that coach or that trainer. I'm like, CrossFit is so bad for you. You can't do it. You're going to hurt yourself. And so she asked me if I wanted to, if I was interested in joining the gym. And at the time, I'm like, no, I'm just going to stick it out here. But what ended up happening is that my daughter, my youngest, she became friends with one of the CrossFit owner daughter, like their daughter. And they were like, hey, would you like Brooke to go to like one of their, like they called it, I can't remember, it was like CrossFit Kids or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, sure. Like, she can go do that, but I'm not going to do it. Right. So we started going there more often. So I could, I'd see her doing her little like rowing and her skips. And then she's like, doing like little, like it was the cutest little thing. Right. And like, they're doing like empty bar snatches and stuff like that. And I'm like, oh, this is cool. But my client wouldn't stop talking about how much of a shift it was for her, like how strong she felt and how empowered she felt. And she's like, I'm so glad I can fuel my body and I don't have to worry about restricting my body and I don't see mirrors. And I'm like, this could be what I'm looking for, because I've always loved lifting. And so for me, I'm just like, anything to move that barbell, let's do it. But I was also having issues with my shoulder, wear and tear, long story short. I was just like, essentially I needed a break from bodybuilding. And so I reached out to the coach, the owner of the box, and I kind of leaned into it, I took on 5 personal training sessions with him to understand basic movements of the clean and jerk, the snatch, and like, okay, what's a muscle up? What's a kipping pull up? All those basics. And I'm like, I'm the pull up queen. I love this shit. So yeah, so I'm just like, I'm going to do this.
Nice.
And so I kind of leaned into it. I did the sessions, and then I'm like, okay, I'll do my first CrossFit class. I didn't love the cardio, but then it became something where I shifted from seeing myself in the mirror for I don't know how many years, continuously critiquing how I looked, to not seeing a mirror and just being like, you know what? I want to get stronger. I love to deadlift. I love to snatch. I love to do all these things like clean and jerk. You know, I want to learn how to do all these things. And so I joined it. And I'll tell you this right now, there's a community factor that's involved with CrossFit, right? So like you've got your bodybuilding community, but to me, it's still selfish because you are comparing yourself to the person beside you. If you're competing, you got to look a certain way. With competitive CrossFit and or CrossFit in general, I just feel like you're just there to cheer people on and to just have a really good workout. And if you beat them, so be it. But maybe next time they're going to beat you. Like it becomes competitive, but in such a better way. So I loved that part.
It's more like a team, like a sports team.
And I'll tell you this right now. I'm not in CrossFit anymore, but I will say this. That community, it really helped me post-contest for sure. It shifted me. And then from that standpoint, that's where I was just like, my client case is just like, boom, escalated because like now I'm in a CrossFit box where everybody's like, oh, I want to learn how to move my body faster, become more efficient. I want to look like the CrossFit competitors. I'm like, whoa, pump the brakes here. You don't want to look like them, but you want to fuel your bodies. And I had to shift gears for myself. So I'm like, I'm going to learn how to do this for me because I've always been restricting. And I've always had really big problems with that. But keep in mind, though, by the time I joined my CrossFit box, because I skipped a little bit, I'd already done a reverse diet for myself. I've already been in a better place, but I still needed to learn how to fuel my body efficiently, effectively for CrossFit. It was a game changer. And it's where I learned to just fuel for performance and who gives a shit how I look. I'm just fortunate enough that I've been in a place of maintenance for so long that my body composition never really changed much other than maintaining as much muscle as I could. Right. But at the end of the day, it was amazing. And if there's one thing that I learned about myself is that I'm competitive and I love to lift. So whatever that environment is that allows me to do both of those things, it's the best thing for me. Now I'm just competitive in life. My goal is to be someone who is the queen of maintenance and to never diet again, because the minute I stepped off stage in 2014, I promised myself I would never diet again. And I had to find a way to do it. And I've never, ever dieted. I have not put myself in any deficit since 2014. In fact, I reversed myself out, got myself to a level of maintenance pre-CrossFit, then got myself to my maintenance calories for there because I didn't want, like, I'm not a CrossFit freaking competitor or anything like that. I did local competitions, but that was it. But I wanted to be in a place where I didn't have to freaking worried about food and all that shit, right? So that's where I was. And through all that, all the lessons I've learned, hypothalamic amenorrhea, so like REDS and all that kind of stuff, understanding what it means to fuel your body for competitive sports, both, you know, in like a body composition phase, but also to like, you know, like let's increase strength. But the biggest thing for me was relationship with food, habits and behaviors, because if I had not changed that, I'd still be in that dark rabbit hole trying to get out. So that's why I do what I do. I want to help as many women understand that we can all diet. Dieting is fucking easy. But to be successful means you have to learn how to maintain it. And if you don't know how to maintain it, you're going to be forever chasing that cycle of diet, that restriction. And yes, you have to have restraint. I hate saying restriction, but you have to have restraint when you're in a deficit. So buy into that or not. Bottom line is, though, true success lies in the maintenance of that journey. Because after all, isn't the goal to lose weight and keep it off? But that's not happening. And so for me, it's like, it's because you have a shitty relationship with food. You have a shitty relationship with your body. You don't understand your habits, behaviors. You got to change what you do from point A to point B and understand what you did, learn, have patience. And that's why I do what I do, because everything else out there is like, get shit done now, restriction, all the crappy science. It's bullshit, actually. So like, I just want to be that person that helps women understand that there are better ways and that you can do this. And there is a way out of the whole cycle.
That was great. That was amazing. You have so much personal experience from the bodybuilding world to the CrossFit world to the reverse diet to the macro counting, raising a family in the middle of all of this, you know, losing a parent, developing an incredible community around yourself. You have a lot to offer.
I do.
You have a lot to offer.
I do.
And
I know that.
yeah. So most of the women that come to you, shifting gears slightly, do you find most women need a reverse diet? How do you get them to a maintenance phase? Tell us a little bit about sort of your methodology around that.
Okay, so I want to preface this with saying that a year ago, Coach B would have been like me. I talk about myself in the third person. I would have talked about like reverse dieting. Like I would have just like, let's talk about because the term itself, the lingo of reverse dieting was known in our industry. But what it really means, and it's always meant, is getting yourself back to maintenance. When I look at reverse dieting, it's like it's going to be applicable to certain situations, but it really is about finding your maintenance. Okay. So when women come to me, in most cases, they're going to be underfueling themselves. They are going to be that person who often restrict, but then overeat on the weekend type of scenario, or overeat just because they just are always in this restrictive mindset, right? So for me, it's like, okay, yeah, it can be called reverse dieting, but really what it is like, I'm trying to find a baseline. So I encourage women to just kind of be patient. Let me see what you're doing. Let's see if we have to add more calories, find your maintenance. And then from that standpoint, we'll figure out whether or not we should be in a deficit and where that deficit is and what this means for you long-term, right? But I would say in most cases, most women are underfueling, but it's because of diet culture. Mm-hmm. They're told to restrict. They're told that carbs are bad, that you can, like you can't have anything, really is what people are telling them. And it's like, that is not true. Yes, you need a caloric deficit, but the problem is that your approach is often you taking out of that line of fire because you're so restrictive. So if you can't adhere to it, then we got to find a way, which is why for me, if you came to me and you were like, just throw the number out there, the typical 1,200 calories, but yet on the weekend, you can't stay near that. It's like, okay, well, we want to get rid of the binge cycle, like that overeating cycle. So like, let's start eating more food. So AKA reverse diet, increase your calories. But when I look at the true definition of what I did for myself, I chose the reverse diet back then to get myself to a place of maintenance, to understand my own specific needs based on what was talked about. So reverse dieting would be slow increments and blah, 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 right? But at the end of the day, I think that when people do a slower approach to a reverse diet versus a recovery diet, and I can explain the two, is that if you are not mentally prepared to see yourself gain some weight first, never mind body fat. So like you can gain some weight, but you can also gain fat depending on whether or not people overshoot your maintenance, right? But for me, I had to prove to myself and build a relationship with food. So I definitely took the steps, smaller increments of adding calories back in after my show, because I had to watch my body change, which was such a mind fuck. And know that I didn't want to be this person who was uber lean. And I understood that, but also knew I did not want to be 20 pounds heavier like I was my very first show. It scared me to death. I was afraid to gain weight. And then I've got this like pressure of being a nutrition coach and trainer in the industry, right? So for me, the smaller steps were applicable. And in most cases, most women, even when they come to me and they're overweight, even adding the calories in slowly there makes more sense because they are already in a bad place with how they look. So if I just threw calories at them, they'd be like, you're fired. Whereas if I can explain to them what's happening with adding more calories in slowly, that they're going to see some changes maybe, on the scale, but that doesn't mean they're gaining body fat. And if we're at a maintenance, you're not going to anyways. Weight will happen, but body fat, no. Right? So like it really is, it depends on each individual. Mm-hmm. But again, like it really is just trying to find your maintenance calories. And some people can jump right to them and be good. Or others, we take that approach with a slower approach. And yes, you delay the deficit, especially if you're coming off a show or something like that. And it depends on the person because hunger is going to be heightened. But at the end of the day, which would you prefer? Are you overeating because you're super hungry and then gaining all this weight and stuff like that, and then you just hate yourself? Or do we try to give you some, some increments that you can work with, understand that don't bring in all the hyperpalatable foods, work towards building your calories up and not overeat, but know that there's a good chance that there's weight gonna, start to creep up, but just wait. Because at least then you don't have this whole like mindset shift of like, oh my God, I look terrible, or I'm gaining all this weight. Like, it's just a better approach. So it does depend. Everyone's going to be different. But I do think that when you're entering into any type of nutrition program, you have to find your baseline. And I don't care who you are. If you don't have the picture, you can't just assign macros or a calorie value. You need to know where you are right today and then understand where your dieting history has been. Mm-hmm. Because I think it's a fallacy to assume that you're broken, you have a broken metabolism, because that is not true. That is lingo that's used in our industry. That is not true. We have metabolic adaptations that can be reversed. But here's the thing. If you want a true metabolic adaptation reversed, you need to gain body fat and you have to take yourself out of a calorie deficit. And that is a matter of fact, and that's a matter of science. But a lot of people want to hold steady with that. And that's the problem. And then they think they're broken. But no, you're just adapted to your intake. Mm-hmm. And you got to choose. You got to make a choice. So even for myself, as I stand here in front of you, Laura, I am somewhat metabolically speaking adapted to my intake. And the reason why I can say that is because I never went back to my previous weight. So if I gained back all my body fat after my show, I would be out of metabolic adaptations, whatever. My fat set point would be where it was at, because that's where my body always settled at.
Right.
But I am not there. So when they talk about like even resetting your fat set point, I don't know how true that is. I'm not a scientist or researcher, but I know this, that I am almost 20 pounds lighter and feel good and function fine, because that was when I was 150 pounds as a young child who had those fat cells. And right. I'm not that person, because I had built in a new relationship with food, habits, and behaviors. I took myself and found my maintenance calories. I know it works for me, but I'm not the same person I was prior to my dieting for my shows. So I'm not necessarily out of my adaptations in that sense, because I didn't gain back all my body fat, but I brought the calories back up. It's kind of like the woo-woo science kind of stuff that people don't actually need to understand. Bottom line is that some people need to sit at maintenance for a bit before they diet, and that's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
I do think it's important to talk about the science, though, because I think it puts things in perspective for people. Most people don't understand. They just think diet. Most people just know one track. I need to lose weight and I need to diet. And some people don't understand that their metabolism is adapted, that they've been eating so low for so long, or doing that flux of low calorie and then binging, that their metabolism has adapted down. And now they have to keep eating less and less and less to lose weight. So I think it is important to talk about the science and why.
But here's the thing, though. Let me interject there for a second.
Yeah.
For me, what I heard there, though, like if you're someone who eats low calories on a regular basis, but then you overeat on the weekend, you're not adapted to low calories. You're just not, you're in a surplus. That's the problem. Like, and that's what I want people to understand. Like, you tell me you're eating 1,200 calories, but you're not. Because on the weekends, the licks, the bites, the creamer you put in your coffee, the stuff that you're doing that you don't pay attention to or want to forget that you've done, add up substantially. And what you think is a calorie deficit is not, which is not metabolic adaptation. You are sitting at maintenance and or surplus if you continuously gain weight. I had a client that said this to me. She's like, well, I'm sitting at maintenance and I just don't understand why I'm gaining. Okay, maintenance calories means you're maintaining, but you're gaining, so you're not at maintenance. She's like, no, I am. I'm nope. Somewhere along the lines, you're eating in a surplus, or your physical activity has changed so much that you're no longer, you don't have that daily energy expenditure like you thought. And that's part of the equation too, right? So at the end of the day, I think it's important for people to understand that. Now, it's true, though, when you diet and you become a smaller human, that you are now adapting to that intake if everything is as is, because as a smaller human, you no longer require the same energy requirements. But here's the thing. This is your deficit. And as you become smaller human, you are quote unquote down regulating, right? Because we know NEAT and everything goes down. But we want to offset that by increasing your calories, taking you to what your maintenance should be based on energy expenditure, your daily activity, all that kind of stuff. So that is where we change that and we switch gears into, trying to reverse those metabolic adaptations. But if you're someone who just claims that you're eating, quote unquote low calories, but then, and you say you're like, I'm just adapted to my intake. No, you're not, because the problem is that you're overeating. So
as
you
a
can
whole,
lose weight
the whole week.
The whole week, right? So like, it's not just what we do on a daily basis. It's what we do on that weekly basis. And that's where, like, for me, it's a game changer for a lot of people when they start zooming out and they're like, oh yeah. So yeah, I eat clean all week. And yeah, I kind of restrict, but like, and that's why I never lose weight. So like, I've been told my metabolism is broken. I'm like, no, you overeat every weekend. And when you do, you put yourself at maintenance. Mm-hmm. So you're maintaining.
Yep.
But if you're overshooting and you're gaining, that's another story too. Like that means you're sending yourself into a surplus that now, like you continuously do it. So you overevaluate your body, then you have a shitty mood, you restrict, and then you binge. And that's the cycle, right? So like if you do that every single time that you overeat, you want to restrict more. And that's part of the problem. So you're like, oh, I'm only eating 800 calories, but you're not, because at the end of the week, you're in a surplus.
Right.
So there's all those things, but there's also underlying health conditions and stuff like that can be existing. But again,
yes,
if this stuff is brought up, like if you understand where your thyroid is, and if you understand what your current energy requirements are in terms of like your energy expenditure and stuff like that, then we can look at the big picture, right? But like here's another case, Laura. You will have a client who says, I'm pretty active, but they sit at their desk all day. Okay, well, that's not active. You are actually sedentary. When you sit 8 hours of the day and only work out 1 hour, you are sedentary. Now, yes, it's great that you're doing the workout. You're building muscle, you're building your cardio, whatever. But when most of the day is sitting and being sedentary, you can't call yourself an active human. At least you shouldn't. You got to be real with yourself and be accepting that you're actually not as active as you are. And also, here's another thing, women, ladies, I say this with so much love and respect. When you're in the gym, when you tell me you're lifting, you better be fucking lifting. Because I see it all the time as a trainer in my past life. When you say like you're lifting, I want to see you. Like, I know what it's like, because I'd be like with a client and they're like, I give them a dumbbell and they're like, that's super hard. But that's them being afraid and not understanding and or trying to push that envelope a little bit with that intensity or their volume, right? So again, you got to be honest with yourself. Are you truly lifting, barbell lifting, dumbbell lifting, or are you just going to a strength class? Because there is a difference. Right. So like, these are the things, and these are the conversations as a coach I have with my clients. It's like, there's no quick fix and there's no easy solution. It is really a conversation. It's really being vulnerable and being honest with yourself, or allowing the coach to help you see some of this stuff. We're not going to tell you, but we're going to help you see what's going on here.
Right. Yeah. Very involved.
Yeah.
So do you count your macros currently?
I'm a loose tracker. So to define that means I don't actively have to have my app open. I kind of like, if I'm interested in asking myself, like, where am I at? I'll track my day. I'm a very structured person. So for me, I like to eat similar. And that probably stems a little bit from my bodybuilding, but I have some favorites in my life. And I truly do believe, and I think Ben Carpenter wrote this in his book, or it's some evidence. When you limit the amount of variety in your life, it makes it easier to stick to and to understand, right? And so for me, like, having similar foods makes it really easy to just kind of swap out foods. So yeah, I can track, but I don't have to.
Right.
So usually it's just if I'm kind of like figuring out like, oh, I wonder where I'm at today. For many years, so I like to explain this to people. Before I became a loose tracker, though, I tracked for probably a good 3 or 4 years consistently, because I truly do believe that even some of the best people in the world, experts in nutrition, registered dietitians, masters or PhDs, they need the time too to build on that skill. We're not great at portion control or guesstimating. So I did it for some time because I needed to learn how to trust myself and to show myself evidence that I can have chocolate every day and not gain body fat and not have to say fuck it or to plan a cheat meal. Like having it
Right.
every day is okay. And so I did that for many years. And so now I'm like, I can go, like I traveled to California last year for 2 weeks. Had no, like we didn't even have an Airbnb. We just hoteled it. I didn't have a freaking plan. I just was winging it. But I do know what some foods look like when I've tracked them in the past. So I'm just like, hey, okay, well, I know going here and here and there, like I can do it and I can navigate it. So
Yeah.
I'm the queen of maintenance, so it makes it easy. I don't have
Yeah.
a deficit goal. I don't want to perform better or whatever. Like I'm just kind of wanting to be here. So,
Right. And I saw you doing over Halloween the one piece of candy per day.
yeah, I did that. I had a group at the time too. And so my challenge for them, because I have a Facebook group and I'm just like, hey, let's do it. Like prove to yourself that you can have one, right?
Yeah.
Even now, like today we're recording and it's Valentine's Day. And I'm just like, I didn't even buy chocolate for my husband. But it's not because I don't think I can trust myself. It's because like I could have it any day and he actually doesn't care. So
Right.
why bother?
Yeah,
But
exactly.
It took me a long time to even be there because even after, especially with my restrictive diets for my shows, I competed on the 26th of October in 2011 and it was Halloween a couple days later. And I remember how hard that was. It was extremely hard, but I knew I was going to be competing again. So I'm like, who cares, right? Like I'm thinking I'm going to just like everybody else, I'll start again and on Monday type thing. So I do remember being a little bit out of control, like having one or two, and then I couldn't stop.
Mm-hmm.
And that scared me, right? And I'm like, I remember being here before, right? So those are the things, like that's restriction. So learning how to have a chocolate every single day is important.
Yeah, I love that strategy. And I think it repatterns your brain, it repatterns your habits, and it repatterns your taste buds. Something that you're so denying yourself all the time. And then you slowly give it to yourself and your body's like, oh yeah, I'm used to this.
Yeah. And the one thing that I would say too, like, because I have the professional designation with the break binge eating course for professionals, they talk about like when they work with anorexics, and I'm not saying I do any of this, but I wanted to take the binge eating course because so many of our clients, I mean, they overeat, right? And I wanted to identify whether or not somebody's a true binge eater and or just someone who has orthorexia or it's just kind of like a little too restrictive and just stress eater, that kind of thing. So I wanted to identify all that kind of stuff. And so I learned all that. But what they did talk about is like when you are trying to bring food into your life to rebuild that relationship with food, one of the things that is really, really helpful is to list what those foods are that are completely 100% forbidden. Any narrative that you've given yourself or a limiting belief around a food, list it. But the most restrictive on the top and the least restrictive at the bottom. And then you take that least restrictive and you start adding it in daily. And you have to give this gives you evidence that nothing bad is going to happen. Now, if you should have it and it turns into something else, you have to document that and understand like, okay, what led to that though? I had it, but for some reason I still overate. What was going on? So like learning those types of tricks and being willing to do that work it is a game changer. Because even for me, it's why I used macro tracking. Because through my competitive years, it was always just a meal plan and just take rice away, take peanut butter away. Like it was just, and here's your specific foods, right? So for me, like wanting to have a pancake for breakfast or a muffin or chocolate, I was just like, I'll just save it for my cheat day. But I'm like,
right.
Why? So I started with small things like chocolate chips. I'm like, okay, I'm just going to add it to my protein dough that I used to make. I could have protein powder, make it into a dough, and I'll just add chocolate chips. And I started doing that. And to this day, I have protein cookie dough every single day, twice a day, because I love it. But I make it different all the time. But I learned that chocolate isn't going to be something that's dangerous for me. But here's the other thing. I also learned that I don't like milk chocolate as much as I thought I did. That I actually like dark chocolate because
That's
I took
right,
the time.
dark chocolate.
Right?
Best
But
one.
I took the time to learn that about myself. So like leaning into all those discomforts of like, okay, like this food is like so scary, but I got to show myself the evidence. So I do that with clients now. Like I think it's important to identify those fears and what that fear is. Is it fear of weight gain or is it fear of the food itself?
Right.
Right. And then breaking that thought down and getting that evidence. And I can tell you right now, if you allow yourself to be a little uncomfortable, lean into that, you're going to understand that it's not near as terrible as you think. Because even for me, bread was one of those things. Hell, I couldn't even eat a banana unless it was a Saturday, because cheat days were Saturdays or Sundays. It doesn't even make sense. One day versus another. How about every single day have a banana? It was definitely like cereal, bread. Oh, frick. There were so many foods that I told myself I couldn't have because I would gain weight. And it's funny because sometimes I'll hear my husband be like, oh, watch the carbs and that. I'm like, where the fuck is that coming from? And I'll get like in this, like, why are you talking like this? Because he's still like bro science about it, right? Because he's not involved in nutrition and fitness and all that, right? Like he's a welder. That's what he does. He welds shit.
Yeah.
But it's interesting though. And Laura, I know you can relate with this because we see so much potential in our clients, but we see their fears and we hear them. And yet we know the tools that can help them, but it's so fucking scary because it's so complex. Eating is so complex. The behaviors we have around it, what influences us, our environment, everything. And even for me, that was a part of it. Like, who I surrounded myself with and stuff like that. And that's why even moving away from bodybuilding, it was probably the best gift I gave myself.
Yeah. And to your point of leaning into the crave, leaning into why is this food a fear? What about it, right? Not pulling away and restricting, but rather asking questions. That's a big sort of philosophy that we have is don't restrict it. Like, let's figure out how to have it. Let's figure out how to have it without eating the whole bag or the box or the can, right?
And looking at things like, because I know you talk about cravings all the time. It's like, understand your craving too. Like, are you craving a specific food because you tell yourself you can't have it all the time? Or are you hungry?
Right.
Like, when's the last time you had a meal?
Yes.
Right. If and that can matter. Like and to each their own. You can be a snacker all day. You can eat 20 times a day. I don't care. You can be intermittent fast. I don't actually care. But if you're continuously, like, oh, I want to have this so bad, but oh my gosh, I shouldn't have it. I'm craving it. And you're having these mental, like these freaking conversations with yourself about I should or shouldn't. Damn, you gotta zoom out. Like, what's actually going on? Like, are you telling yourself you can't have it because, feed your body, feed your soul? Because I tell you, I didn't for a very long time. I didn't enjoy life, even though I looked amazing, but I wasn't happy. Yeah, for sure. It was hard. It was definitely hard.
Yeah. And that's another element. Food isn't just fuel. Food is celebration, and it's emotional in both positive and negative, and being able to embrace both sides of those is important. And that's the salt of life, right? Like, have a cookie on a Valentine's Day with your husband, right? Or split the dessert, or have the beer at the ball game or whatever. It doesn't have to be this all or nothing. And that's how we enjoy life, those elements too.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, because I've been on that side of all or nothing. Like, I think about how I would describe myself, and it was just like more of that restrictive mindset. A lot of food labels for sure. And just never given myself permission. I was just so afraid, right? But I also gave myself some evidence of that fear by going back to, and not thinking about this, but here's an example. It's like, when I did overeat and gain 20 pounds in a week, I didn't remind myself that it was because of a competitive bodybuilding show. I just remember me doing the action of like eating till I would eat even though I had like acid in my throat. Like, I couldn't stop. I had no idea what it meant. Like, no one told me about hunger after a show. Like, no one, right? That's normal, they say. But like, if I had taken the time, I probably could have been like, okay, so this is why. And then I wouldn't have had so much fear.
Right.
We don't take the time. So like, it's kind of like, even when you look at somebody's dieting history, like, what diets have you done? And what has led you to where you are right now with your restrictions or your thoughts around food? Because if you pay attention to your history, you'll likely come to a conclusion as to why and what now you can do to change it. But if you ignore that, you're not going to be able to identify it all. You'll miss some key important factors. And that is why sometimes it takes so much time for your behavior change to happen and for things to be where you want them to be. Why it also takes, an army for you to maintain. And for some of you, why you never will, because you don't want to do that work. And I remember having this conversation with Karen on my podcast, because we talked a little bit about that of like, is it wrong for me as a coach to say, just own your shit? Is that too harsh? And she said it can be, because some people are just not ready or may never be ready to truly identify what has been holding them back and why their behavior changes so hard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So those are things I've even learned that just working with and talking to someone like Karin, who has a PhD in behavioral change. Like, it's not as easy as we think. And as coaches, we need to understand that too. But if we have to explain that to you, I know it's difficult for you to understand.
Yeah. And that's why I asked you about being observant of your thoughts and being observant of your patterns, because it oftentimes takes a skilled professional to help us get there, right? It's not like we just wake up and we're like, oh, I'm noticing these repeating patterns, and oh, I'm doing the same mistakes over and over. And is it me, right? What am I doing? So yeah, you and I have our mindset coaching certification. And so we've gone through 12 weeks of course material in behavior change and goal setting and all sorts of modalities to help our clients along. Because I know before I got certified, I was just telling clients what to do. I was like, well, this is what you got to do to get results, right? And good luck.
Yeah.
But then I really started learning that it was really about guiding clients to discovering their own solutions. Because your life is completely different than my life. Why am I going to tell you what works for me when I don't have 2 kids at home, right? I don't have a 9-to-5 job. So it was really instrumental in how I coach my clients now and the results that they're getting. And I'm sure you could say the same for how you coach too.
Yeah. Like, my first step was definitely taking, like, when I did Precision Nutrition's level 1, it was just the foundations of nutrition, but their PN2 was like client centered and really brought you into that. But I do agree with you. Like, with HMCC, I learned a little bit more about understanding the modalities behind it and understanding like some really key questions that we can start to ask ourselves, and giving the client more autonomy and allowing them to build, and I'm going to use another big word, self-efficacy, because like that allows us to create that evidence, right? So when you decide, so like an example, Laura, like if I told you you need to macro track and you just do it because I've told you to, the chances of you actually following through with that are going to be next to, like it might happen for the first couple of weeks, but then you're going to quit, maybe, right? Whereas if I had asked you, like, do you understand macro tracking? Is there something like, are you curious about it? Would you like to try it? Like, what are your thoughts on that? And if you said, you know what, I've heard about it, I'm interested, I'd like to learn it. Sure, let's try it. Now you're going to be more involved because you've made that decision. You decided based on the evidence or information around you that you are now going to try this tool. So like when you come across coaches in the industry that are just dictators, you might see results, but it's not going to last forever because it's still like because if you think about it, they're just the fad diet. Like a coach telling you what to eat, how to eat, when to do, like all those things is just another way of you following a fad diet. Mm-hmm. Whereas you and I are going to lay out kind of some of like what we see, and we're going to allow the client to make some decisions, come to their own conclusions, even maybe pull out some of the stuff that you have not seen, because now they're now sharing more. They're being a little bit more vulnerable because they see the questions you're asking and they have wanted you to ask those questions. They just didn't know. Right. And now they're starting to share more. So now the big picture is coming in, because I don't know if this has happened to you, but I've started with clients that never wanted to share with me that they once had a binge eating disorder, that they were fully diagnosed, blah, 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 blah. But when I find that out, I'm like, okay, so where's the therapist now? What are the action, like, what was the action plan? Why are we here? Because once I identified that, oh my gosh, this might be out of my lane, now I'm in a better place. Whereas I might have just been like, okay, let's just assess this and let's assess that. Why is this person having such a difficult time? Like not adhering, but because I was asking the right questions, they're going to share with you. Mm-hmm. Well, I once suffered from a binge eating disorder, actually. And then you might be like, oh, you know what? A deficit right now? Maybe you need to go back to therapy first. Right. And then you and I can reconnect, right? So like that's the difference, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that having that type of background is important, because we have to understand the clients better, for sure. It is a mindset, and there's the habits and the behaviors. Like that's what I'm all about, is like, I wish I could say it in one sentence. You know how they say you have that elevator freaking.
Yes, your elevator pitch.
Yeah, I don't have that. Because
you do. You're a no BS coach, the queen of maintenance. And you help women change their mindset around their bodies.
I guess, but I used to say figure your shit out, but then I'm like, does that really sound right? But like, I have a mug that says that. I've used the hashtag. I have shirts that say it. But it really is, if you think about it, and just to have some laughter with it, it is about figuring your shit out. But it's not just one thing. And that's why I say it, because maybe it is your relationship with food, but maybe it's your relationship with your body. But which came first? Is it your moods? Is it where you are in your life because you're a mom who's got kids going out to university and you are absolutely in this place of perimenopause and menopause and all this, like, oh my God, I'm getting old, like your midlife crisis. Is that the reason? And now you're drinking more and not moving as much. Like,
right.
These are the things that we can start to identify, right? But I think at the end of the day, you know, like, I don't know, like I like to say that figuring your shit out, own your shit. But I do believe that it's really about your relationships and your environment, your habits and behaviors, because without those foundations, Laura, I don't believe people can be truly successful, which is why, you know, and I know I'm promoting his book, which is why I think Ben's book is amazing, because he talks about that stuff that I know has made a huge difference in why my clients see results, because it's not cookie cutter.
It's about the individual.
Yeah.
Yeah. So where can women find you? Women and men, where can people find you if they want to work with you?
I reside mostly on Instagram. So Motivate Be Fit. And then my website is motivateandbefit.com. And I'm sure you'll probably have that listed in the show notes. It's spelt not this how it sounds. There's an E missing behind the B. One of these days I'll change that.
That's okay.
But I hang out there, and then you'll see me on TikTok too. I kind of play around there, but mostly my podcast as well. So More Than Macros Radio is another spot that you can find me. But, you know, for what it's worth, just reach out. Just reach out. Like if you have any questions or that kind of thing, for sure. I want to help you figure your shit out.
Thank you. Yeah. And I don't think figure your shit out is necessarily a negative thing. You know, I think some women need that in their face and they need to, I do.
Yeah, I do.
So we like to finish the podcast with, or I like to finish the podcast with, like, what is your favorite crave food? Your favorite yum yum food that just gives you all the feels, all the comforts you like to snuggle up with, and that one thing that maybe you crave?
Like, it's a real tough toss up here, and it's going to be so boring. People are going to think, oh, it's got to be cheesecake or something. In my restrictive days, there was a list, but I would honestly say, and I really wish, I should make a book out of it, but my pancake, I created my own pancake. It's my pumpkin protein pancake I have every morning without hesitation. So it's made with eggs and egg whites and oats, and then pureed pumpkin. I top it with whipped cream cheese, and then I put berries on top. It's a weird mixture, but it tastes so freaking good.
Sounds delicious.
Yeah. So pumpkin pancake every single day, but a close second would be my protein cookie dough, because it tastes like fudge, and it's protein. Yeah. And it's really like, when I look at the big picture of, like, when you look at protein bars and stuff like that, like mine is protein powder, powdered peanut butter, oats and dark chocolate, water. Like, there's nothing else added to it. It just depends on how much water you add and what you want. But it's so basic. And I've been having that since 2011.
I think we need both of those recipes.
I didn't start adding the dark chocolate until 2014 though. But I used to call it my protein puck, and I would make it out of an isolate protein powder. And because I need to eat protein powder, I can't drink it because it's not satiating at all. So if you want to learn a trick with that, like, don't drink your protein if you don't feel satiated. Make it out of something. So I would make it into, I had natural peanut butter back then, and then I would make it into this little cookie dough thing, and I would squish it and put it into a little container and keep it cold. And that's what I would have in between clients when I was working on the floor as a trainer. But then once I was done my show, again, this is where I learned, like, I'm going to take that and I'm going to start adding dark chocolate to it, because I think that would taste really super good. And I don't want to not have this. But then when I transitioned from an isolate, because it's pretty sticky, I went into like a complex protein powder. So like I use Hexapro. It's delicious, and it may not be the best protein powder out there, but I don't care because it tastes good. And you want to stick to foods that you like and you can be consistent with.
There we go.
I use the Hexapro. I put a scoop in there. I put powdered peanut butter. I add some dry oats and or raw oats, whatever. And then I add dark chocolate. And I make that with just enough water to make it dough. Like it legitimately looks like cookie dough. Yum. And I eat it every day. Every day.
Sounds so good.
It's so good. And if you crave, you're the expert in craving. If you have these cravings for things like chocolate and you want to quote unquote healthify it, which you don't have to, it is a great way to get protein in while hitting your chocolate. Because it tastes that good.
Well, that's why I'm saying I need the recipe. I'm a chocolate fiend.
Oh, I love it. And I'm just like, I've tried different things too. Like, okay, I'll add cranberries to it. My husband used to do that. He would do the cranberries, the oats, and then he would add dark chocolate and he would make it into almost like a pudding though, because you can, depending on how much water you want to add.
Right.
But I like mine as a dough because I like to savor it. So like I like to chew it. I like it to melt in my mouth.
Yes.
Like it's so good. So drink that or have it with water or tea or coffee. Tastes good no matter what. Because it's like mocha.
Well, now I'm hungry.
Oh, there you go.
Now I'm ready for some chocolate dough.
So, but yeah, it's been a blast. It's been a great conversation today. I really appreciate you having me on the podcast because it was a great conversation.
Of course. I appreciate your expertise and the energy that you bring and all of your years of experience and your insight. It takes a lot to be reflective in your own journey and see, I don't want to say where you've gone wrong, but
you're not wrong in saying that. You're not wrong. Yeah.
Things that we could have done better, right? And the lessons we learned. And to your point, we don't regret anything, but we've learned along the way. Is there anything that you want to share with our listeners as a final thought before we head out?
I just really do think that if there's one thing that I often say to my clients or anybody listening is just like, you need to understand where you are right now. If you have any type of body composition goal or even a performance-based goal, if you don't know where you are right now, you're likely not going to get to where you need to be. So don't just like be a keyboard warrior and start typing in like your body weight and stuff like that to figure out where your macros quote unquote should be. Figure out where you actually are to identify what needs changing and also reflect on what has happened in the past so you can figure that out because the story started back then. It doesn't start today. You are a byproduct of the choices you've been making to this day. And unless you're willing to unlearn and relearn some of this stuff, going to where you want to go, like even in a competitive nature or whatever, may not come to light. Not the way you want it to. It might a little bit, but then you might disappoint yourself because you skipped the steps. You don't want to leap. You want to chip away because I'll tell you this right now. 2014 happened a long time ago. It took me an entire year of quote unquote reverse dieting to understand where my maintenance calories should be. Then I decided to join CrossFit and I had to learn how to fuel my body because I was once a restrictive person and I knew that about myself. It scared me. But I also knew that in order for me to get better at a muscle up, to beat some of these people in these competitions, to beat myself, I had to learn something new. But I didn't skip over that. I had to do it in time. And then that just kind of created, and lays that foundation. So like, I really do think that I know you've got a goal, and that's okay. And it doesn't matter what it is, by the way. It doesn't matter if you want to change your body. You can accept who you are, whatever. It doesn't matter. Whatever that goal is, figure out where you are right now, reflect, figure out what needs changing, set it up, and then pursue that goal, but give yourself time.
Thank you. And I like how you put that chipping away versus taking the leaps. Well, thank you so much for being on, and we will see you guys on the next podcast.